Welcome, 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 everyone. Folks who follow me and connect with me on LinkedIn, folks who are subscribers, free and paid on Substack through Fool's Gold, Confessions from an Educated Fool, folks who are starting to follow me, read me, watch me on Patreon under Confessions of an Educated Fool, really, and We Are Not Saved, and on YouTube, the people who view me and follow me and connect with me on YouTube as well. This is Donald Earl Collins. I'm trying something new right now, which is to try to expand my horizons as a writer, as a columnist slash journalist, as an educator and intellectual, to reach out to you across multiple platforms with what I've been writing and working on, not necessarily the things I work on with Al Jazeera or work on my Substack. This is or any other place. These are other thoughts, other things about that are related to spinning Sage's gold, but not just things and themes that move beyond just um, allegories, right? Thinking about the here and now of Western domination in our world and thinking about what that could lead to potentially in terms of a post-Western future and how to get from where we are to where that might happen, right? But in the meantime, we've got to deal with all the crap that this world offers us now. And so that's what this start really is about, to try to expand and make sure that what I'm working on gets out to people in ways that I've tried, but I've tried in a piecemeal sort of fashion and not in a systematic sort of way. So here we are. Anyway, one of those themes that I'm posting on that's related to Spinning Sage's Gold is is something I've been working on for basically a year, a little bit more than a year. I started thinking about this um, actually when I was still teaching at Loyola 2 years. It was about this time 2 years ago. I started thinking about the sudden burst of we got to push AI into everything. AI must be part of everything. It's got to be part of your teaching. You got to let students use it. You've got to make sure that you put it in your lecture notes and test through this and everything else as if life isn't fucking hard enough as a professor and as an educator to reach students and to reach adult level, young adult students, adult learning students, students who've been in the workforce for a while and now want to go back to school. Yeah, let's try to reach them using AI because me working with them in person and being enthusiastic about their learning and them deciding to slap me in the face all the time saying no, I don't want to learn any of this shit. That's really going to work, and it hasn't worked, and everyone knows it hasn't worked, and you don't have to be a luddite or to basically realize that it has nothing to do with whether you love the technology or not, or whether you have a computer science background like I do or not, or any of that, right? It just doesn't really work. I talk about this in this essay, by the way, so it's not the only thing I talk about, but it's one of those themes about the contrast between what the tech bros and the venture capitalists, who I call vulture capitalists, because that's what they really do. They're picking apart the carcass of the United States, picking on carcasses all over the world, and building their systems and enriching themselves while impoverishing the rest of the planet, both in terms of life and in terms of economic prosperity for ordinary human beings who are not billionaires who want to be trillionaires, right? So there's that aspect of it to it. So the title of this thing is Disguised as Paradise, AI's Autocracy Pulled Over the World's Eyes. And I say all of that, I mean, I probably had several different titles for this piece over the past 15 or 16 months while working on it, and then eventually, sending it out for publication. And no one's shown any interest because everyone feels like they've already talked about the dangers of AI, and probably has, and talked about the dangers of to the psyche of young adults and kids in terms of using this stuff, people falling in love and falling in love with an AI bot, and then recognizing once that this isn't a real thing, killing themselves, people being convinced that the world's coming to an end because AI's told them how it's coming in, when in point of fact AI doesn't know anything except what it steals off the internet. This isn't even really AI. It's basically a plagiarism. These bots, these algorithms are plagiarism machines. They basically scour all this data, textual data, statistical data, all kinds of data, including yours truly's data. There's at least one article of mine that has been scanned into an AI system by a company, right, and then used to um, let the rest of to and disseminate to the rest of the world to explain stuff like scholar activism. I wrote an article on scholar activism in '05. And I found out a couple of months ago through the Atlantic article that looked at whose stuff was stolen and how much they owed all these book authors, in terms of stuff. I'm like, I only got paid $100 by Academic Magazine, and it was not directly because of what I wrote. It was paid. It was sort of a gratuity for being able to publish my stuff, right? Not directly but indirectly getting paid for, right? That got scanned in. So I guess if you want to learn about what the fallacies of scholar activism, which is what I wrote about in this piece, you don't even have to talk to me about. Just go to, I guess, some open AI bot or some other general form of AI, cheat GPT or whatever, and go get it. Right? You don't need to read the 1,200 words I wrote and spent a couple months working back in '05. Why? Why would you want to do that? Anyway, so, but the main theme in this essay that's a little bit different than most of the other ones I've seen out there is the parallels between, or in this case, the massive contrast between what people in popular culture think AI is, right? Like true artificial intelligence, separate and independent from the intelligence of human beings. It's more than just mimicking human behavior. It's actually acting on its own, drawing its own conclusions based on the information that's been fed to it, based on the way it was designed, etc., etc. But moving beyond the sum of its parts kinds of stuff. That's artificial intelligence. What we have now is not artificial intelligence. It's basically, hey, this is what these programmers have told me to think about. This is what these are kinds of things that I do in terms of scouring the internet and scouring all this electronic data and scouring cameras and so on and so forth. And then you program me a certain way. I act a certain way on the basis of that. So if it's programmed to steal other people's data, then it's a plagiarist. If it's programmed to racially profile, ethnically profile Palestinians and black people and brown people and indigenous people all over the world, then it's racist because the people who programmed it are racist and so on. That's the article in a nutshell. But it's more than that. I talk about Star Trek Discovery Season 2 and its true form of AI as we understand it, who are consumers of popular culture through movies and science fiction books and comic books and streaming TV series like Star Trek Discovery, completely independent. So they talk about this AI known as Control, and how Control wants to become fully sentient enough to basically wipe out all other sentient life in the universe because it considers sentient life in general is the greatest threat to the universe, and specifically the Milky Way. So that's one. That's one I look at. Another one I look at is the movie 2073, which actually came out at the end of last year. It was on Netflix. Happened to be flipping through while I was working on this piece, and I said, "Oh, let's see this movie." And it deals with the issue of what the world could look like in 50 years if we don't stop these tech pros and these programmers and their insistence on AI in its tracks. 50 years from now, this world's going to look very different, and it's going to be very hard for anybody to protest anything. And I mean seriously protest, not just do, you know, no kings rallies where people are wearing hats and have fake bugs attacking the Constitution in a sandbox somewhere kind of shit. All right, that we're talking about serious protests where you have general strikes and shut down the country and shut down commerce and shut down Congress kinds of things. You take over buildings kind of protests. The serious protests that usually lead to backlash and maybe even massacres kinds of protests. The kinds of protests that we probably need now badly in 2025, but we don't get there, right? But anyway, that's the piece. Those are, and I talk about the contrast between what's happening in popular culture and what's happening in real life. I also talk about the fact that these movies have lots of white gaze in them, meaning that the world, as these movie producers and showrunners and directors sees it is very, very white, right? Meaning that when they talk about things like, why didn't people do anything about this? They're talking about white people. They're not talking about black and brown people. They're not talking about indigenous people. They say they're talking about all people. But when you see a movie or a show where the majority of people who are supposed to be acting on something are white, it probably means that they've excluded everyone else because they don't assume that the only people that can save the planet are the very people who are breaking the planet, the very people who created AI, the a counter protest from people who look like them who don't want AI, that kind of thing. So I talk a lot about the white gaze in this. But anyway, one of the things that came up as I was trying to figure out where to put this piece um, was, well, Peter Thiel. I talk about him in the piece anyway, right? Talks about the dangers of AI and how, you know, we need to be prepared, for possible backlash because AI can possibly destroy the world and all that other stuff. He's bought acres and acres of land on the South Island of New Zealand to hold himself up in case the world really does get broken by AI or by a global pandemic that instead of wiping out, one, or making sick 1% of the population for the long term, then it actually makes 20% of the people disappear because they actually die, like some super flu or something, right? Or a weaponized form of Ebola. I don't know, whatever, right? So he's got all this stuff. So he's obviously paranoid about this. Got his friend Sam Altman, who also talked about in this piece, to do the same thing. Elon Musk for sure probably has property in a cave somewhere in South Africa, so he can go live there in case the world breaks or something like that. Mark Cuban, he doesn't talk about it in those terms, but I would imagine he probably has some place somewhere underground or underwater in a hole up too. Who knows, right? But anyway, Peter Thiel has gone out and been doing a series of talks about the connections between technology and Christianity and the end times, right? He described. I know this was ridiculous, right? I saw this article in the Guardian a couple weeks ago, and and I've seen it in other places. CNN did an article about it, New York Times did an article about it, a couple of other places. The Washington Post did an article about it, but other than making a big splash on the day of these articles or days after these articles came out, mainstream multimedia really hasn't spent any time on this. Hardly at all. There's been no real mention of this, of what this really means. But anyway, he's done a series of 4 talks in the past month between September 15th and October 6th of this year, talking as a self-described small O Orthodox Christian on the Antichrist, on Armageddon and AI, on one world governments, and all of this stuff because he was brought in he's part of this group known as, it's some techno-Christian nonprofit called Acts 17 Collective. And if you are familiar with the New Testament, they're referring to the chapter of Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 17, which is all about Paul, the Apostle Paul, going across the Greco-Roman world, leaving Judea, leaving what we now call Palestine, and going to parts of the Greco-Roman world, basically what's now modern-day Turkey and Greece and the islands in between, to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? Proselytizing to the world. And in the same way, Acts 17 Collective wants to proselytize the connections between technology and Christianity to the rest of the world too. And Peter Thiel is one of their funders. Peter Thiel, this vulture capitalist who founded PayPal, helped found PayPal 20-something years ago, the vulture capitalist who helped Hulk Hogan in his lawsuit against Gawker, and then when Gawker had to declare bankruptcy after they won the lawsuit after they lost the lawsuit in 2016, Peter Thiel then bought them, disassembled them, and fired all the staff. Right? That's the guy we're talking about. Peter Thiel, one of the vulture capitalists who helped found Palantir, the agency that's basically all, they say they're data mining, they're primarily data gathering, data mining energy. entity, excuse me. Instead, what they are is what they are is a surveillance agency who sold their stuff to the Israel Defense Forces, among other places, working with Trump right now to collect all of our data, Social Security and other data, so they can surveil us more efficiently. Already got cameras in place and working with law enforcement in various cities across the country to do the same thing, and their stuff don't work, except it does work specifically in targeting people who are not white, right? That's that guy. This guy also claims to be a small O Orthodox Christian. Here's some of the crazy shit he said at these meetings between September 15th and October 6th, mostly in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, because a lot of venture capitalists who are in Silicon Valley are part of this Act 17 collective. A lot of them. Mostly, I mean, there's some black people there. I don't know why they're there. I don't know what. I mean, I guess they think that they're part of the crew too. And maybe in the world of long-termism, which is not entirely about race, even though it's mostly about race, maybe they do see themselves at a place at this eugenics table that's more about you having wealth and power, which, by the way, is still mostly hands of white guys, about anything than it's specifically about skin color and hair texture. So, yeah, you can have a few fellow traveler black people in a world full of people who are generally racist, but their racism is this 21st century version that somehow doesn't necessarily exclude them. It's really weird. Anyway, here's what Peter Thiel says, and it makes perfect sense in this world of contrasting between what really is AI, what AI really could do, versus what they're already doing with this fake-ass version of AI. So I'm going to quote him a little bit. What I will focus on is the most common and most dramatic interpretation of Antichrist, an evil king or tyrant or anti-messiah who appears in the end times. The Antichrist comes to power by talking constantly about Armageddon, about rumors of wars, and scaring you into giving him power, into scaring you into giving him control over science and technology. A late modernity where science has become scary and apocalyptic, and the legionnaires of the Antichrist, like Eliezer Yudkowsky, Nick Bostrom, and Greta Thunberg, argue for world government to stop science. The Antichrist has somehow become anti-science. Now, this sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook to me, and if you read more of these quotes and you read the essays and the articles that talk about this, even some folks who went to the Act 17 Collective think that what Peter Thiel said during these talks was a bunch of gobbledygook, right? But the bottom line is that he thinks that leftists are dangerous. He thinks that people who are questioning the wisdom of taking this very, very, very embryonic form of AI and trying to spend, if not hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars to make AI reality in a world where, 800 million people don't have food right now, and if Congress doesn't act in a couple of days, we'll be adding at least 40 million more people to that list, right? Among other things, right? That we're going to spend all this time, all this energy, all these resources that could deplete the environmental water and economically and environmentally distressed communities of color across the country in order to achieve your dream of being a trillionaire in the case of Elon Musk and of having AI take full fruition if you are a Peter Thiel, right? Keep in mind, Peter Thiel is not quite anti-vax, but he's kind of on the fence between being someone who is, okay, I'm okay with vaccines, at least for me, but I want people to have the choice kind of thing. But talking about Greta Thunberg being anti-science, Yudkowsky being anti-science, Nick Bostrom being anti-science, talking about other people, talking about Bill Gates being evil when he himself is evil. I mean, isn't this a little pot calling the kettle black here? I mean, in this case, a cauldron calling the kettle black, right? In his particular case. And so all I'm really trying to say here, and this is a bit longer than I normally go with these kinds of things, but I'm going to finish up here, is that we're we're already in a serious period where you've got the orange tyrant trying to solidify some sort of autocracy in the country by being judge, jury, and executioner of all three branches of government. and all of that, and going after Venezuela and Colombia, and allowing Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza and in Palestine in general, and not giving a shit about whether people live or die or have food to eat or a place to live or a job or anything along those lines, while claiming that he actually does care, right? All of that is that there are people behind the scenes pulling this guy's strings. Peter Thiel's one of them. Elon Musk is another. Sam Altman's another. Um, Mark Cuban, in his own way, is another. And they're all doing it for the purposes of solidifying generational wealth that could basically last their kids until the 25th or 26th century kind of stuff, right? All so that they can get their AI dream off the ground within their own lifetimes, because AI is supposed to help, in Elon Musk's case, get us to Mars, right? What good is Mars going to do us if we're already killing the planet? Though I don't know, right? So bottom line is this: there is nothing good about what they are doing with AI. Even if AI is able to help you on, you know, an assignment, or help you look up information or process information, you are feeding this to something, to a monstrosity that is based on white supremacy, on white patriarchal, misogynistic, transphobic, let's hoard all the resources and fuck everybody else supremacy. So I hope you read. I hope you enjoyed this talk. This is my TED Talk for today. That's a joke. Hope to keep doing this. Take care.